Now the transfer market is almost closed for January and until the summer, and there hasn't been that many deals done, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by a man who knows a lot more about the transfer market than I do. Alan Gernon is his name, and he's the author of Transfer Market, The Inside Stories. Alan, thanks very much for coming on.
Hi Enda, thanks for having me on the show.
So the transfer market is something that everyone has an interest in, but how many people actually know how it works properly? Because there's so many stories out there, and especially with social media now, it's impossible to tell what stories are real, what stories are not real. So you obviously have written a pretty comprehensive book on it, and you've spoken to loads of players about it. How difficult is it to tell the truth in these stories?
Incredibly, and really, I guess a couple of reasons I wrote the book. One of them being mainly that I'm a total sucker for transfer gossip. Like most football fans, I'd check BBC gossip column every night when it changes at midnight, and going back to the days of CFAX, checking page 338 and 324 just for the latest transfer gossip. But I think a couple of years ago, I just got fed up with the rumours. One of the reasons I wrote the book was just to discover just how much truth there is in rumours. So I looked back. I picked a particular day in maybe, I think it was 12 years ago, just one summer's day. BBC, there was maybe about 30 or 40 rumours, and about 22% of them actually resulted in a transfer. So that was just one day, but there's a UK website, I think it's called footballtransferleague.co.uk. They've looked back at 45,000 transfers, and again, that figure of 22% actually result in a transfer. So basically, I guess 80%, 4 out of 5 rumours are reading, there's no truth to them, or there may be some truth, but they don't result in a transfer. So I guess we need to take most of it with a pinch of salt, really.
Well, let's start from the beginning there, because you did mention that you used to check on CFX, on teletext, and gossip columns would have been a massive thing when print was the main outlet for sports coverage. So do you think the nature of these transfers have changed since social media has come along, since the internet has come along? Because it seems like gossip columns are absolutely made for online publication. Yeah,
definitely. And when we might dismiss the 80% that don't result in a transfer, I spoke to, as you said, dozens of players, along with a lot of agents and people working with the UK Red Tops, and they all really said that there is some sort of grain of truth to transfers, whether it's a club spinning it, the agent spinning it, player himself. So they're not, I'm probably naively went into it thinking like most rumours are just to fill paper space or just to get clicks on social media, but there is some sort of grain of truth, whether it's a club signalling that they're willing to sell a player, or an agent obviously doing something on their player's behalf to get a better contract. But even spoke to agents who'd been dealing with Man United a couple of windows ago, and United let them know in no uncertain terms that their player, the agent's player, was maybe 4th or 5th on a list in that position. So United could have been linked with 4 or 5 right backs or left backs, and they're only going to sign one. So that's one of the reasons, I guess, that agents gave to me, that what you're reading might be true, but they'll have other people that they're considering as well at the same time. So there is some sort of grain of truth, and it's only since I wrote the book that I'm sort of read the transfer rumours now and try and figure out what sort of angle this story is coming from, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and you've broken up the book into different sections. So the first chapter focuses on the impact transfers have on players themselves. So we might finish off with that, because you break it up into the media and to agents as well, and the power that they have in not only getting transfers over the line, but the power they have in influencing other clubs and getting them to bid. So Manchester United would be one club that everyone looks at in the transfer window, not only because they desperately need players, but also because they are constantly linked with players that you look at the transfer and you almost know straight away it's not true, because it's not going to happen. It's too ambitious, and it's definitely not going to happen, especially in the January transfer window. So why do you think that Manchester United in particular are the focus of main transfer rumours?
Well, it's because people are interested in them, I guess. like in the book itself, I took a random summer, maybe a couple of years back, I think it was 2017, and just from a cursory glance online, tried to total all the players United have been linked with. And, I think it filled an entire page in the book, just names of people they've been linked with. I think 3 of them actually happened, and a couple were the following season that they actually signed. So I think it's just to get click-throughs, to get eyes on pages. But again, going back to the previous point, a lot of it may be players that they have an interest in, or players who are interested in joining, and there's something just been floated out there. Like I spoke to a professor of economics and sports economics who likened it to market signaling in economics, where the market signaling that they're willing to buy or sell something, and he linkens it to that. And also, I guess in the summertime there's a vacuum in the football, the 24-hour football media, where there's not many games on, and they need to fill space. And some tabloid journalists admitted to me that that's another reason that there's enough, like when there's no transfer window open, you don't tend to see as many rumours, but it's just to fill space, I guess, when there isn't as much action on the pitch.
So how closely would the media work along with these agents as well as the clubs in getting these sort of rumours out? Would that be, I wouldn't say it's insider trading as such, but so say, for example, Everton want a player from Sporting Lisbon, let's say Bruno Fernandes, they're looking to sign him, but Everton know that if they float a rumour out there that Manchester United are also interested in him, that the price Everton have to pay will automatically go up. So how often do you think it's the clubs, first of all, feeding the information out to the press, and how often do you think the agents are the ones that pull the strings?
Well, from speaking to media and agents, it's a good mixture of both. I spoke to one tabloid journalist in the UK that they want to be the first person that agent calls. Sometimes a club might just do a general statement to a press pack, whatever. But each agent has their favourite journalist, or maybe Sunday journalist. But again, going back, he mentioned some transfer stories from years back that journalists maybe had to sit on. They got the info on a Tuesday or Wednesday and had to sit on until the Sunday papers come out, which he said is totally, it just can't be done anymore with social media. So it's all sort of instant now, where they get that rumour, and they do try, and he did stress that they try and verify it with a few sources. If they're not 100% confident that there's some truth in it, that they won't run with it, and will wait till they get something that they are confident in.
And did he give you any indication of how concrete those sources, like, could it be just someone within the club? It doesn't have to be a high-ranking official at all, as long as it's coming from someone within the club, that they can eventually run with that.
Exactly.
Then
Yeah, they'll all have sources that they will, or even a family member of the player or something, they'll all have some sources that they'll try and verify it with. But sometimes it just won't. Like, this particular journalist wrote a story about Mikel Sylvester. He was set to sign for Man City and was adamant this was going through, checked his sources. Mikel Sylvester, he was having I think a medical with Man City, and got a phone call from Arsene Wenger last minute and walked out and signed for Arsenal. So in that sort of case, they were confident in their story. They were certain it was going to happen, but then, they couldn't, I guess, realise that he'd get a last-minute call from his fellow Frenchman that we really wanted him to play for. So in that sort of case, they'll be confident it's going to happen, but obviously they can't foresee everything before the transfer is completed. And
as well as the media, the agents also have a huge role in getting a player to a certain club, sometimes for their own benefit, sometimes for the benefit of the player. Obviously, everyone knows the names of the super agents like Mino Raiola and Jorge Mendes, but outside of those, is it the agents that we might not know about that are pulling most of the strings in football, especially in England?
There's been huge changes since 2015. With the agent home market was deregulated by FIFA. So prior to 2015, there was 500 or 600 registered agents in the UK, and after deregulation, there's about 2,000. So before 2015, you had to do a really hard exam. So it was a 20-question multiple choice exam, which sounds really easy, but some years the pass rates were like 6%. So you needed to know like thousands of pages of legislation and, different legislation from, I guess, different FIFA countries. So nowadays, when that was scrapped, nowadays you just need 500 quid really, and myself or yourself could become an agent overnight. So there's 1,500 more agents now, and obviously there's the same sort of number of players. But when you look through the list of those agents, and you see those names that you mentioned there, but the other change is you recognise a lot of sort of surnames, like there's Rashfords, Arnautovic's, Welbeck's, Aubameyang. So there's a lot of players, brothers and fathers now acting for them, whereas before they were prohibited from making money from family members' deals. So after deregulation, that's been scrapped. So now there's a lot of more, I guess, players being represented by brothers or family members who may not have experience really in the whole agency side of things. So, I guess there's some players I spoke to said, the best deals they ever got, their dad did it for them, and then others were a bit more skeptical, thinking, you need experience in this. You wouldn't, as one super agent said to me, you wouldn't get a brain surgeon to work on your brain if you'd never done brain surgery before, if you know what I mean. Or so, I guess there's a balancing act there, but that seems to be the main change in the last few years, apart from the increase, is that there's a lot more family members, I guess, trying to not cash in, but I guess trying to help their brothers or siblings or sons to rather than going with these agents who they may be quite wary of. But I spoke to dozens of players, and most of them, like, I always wonder what exactly agents do, but most of them reckon that they didn't give this term, I guess, a necessary evil, where they have helped them throughout the career. They've had their mixture of bad and good ones, but they probably couldn't get by without an agent to the place they were in their career when I spoke to them.
Yeah, and I suppose Neymar is probably the prime example of someone that you think of whose father acted as his agent, and some clubs have had serious difficulty dealing with him in the past, and I think he's something still ongoing at the minute with PSG and with Barcelona. So there's also a downside to that side of things. From speaking to these super agents, do they care about loyalty within football, or are they simply out to get the best deal for their football player? I spoke to probably half a dozen agents, and they all say that they try and do their best for their player, but they're also, if their player's doing well, they're doing well too. But they do try and plan a player's career. Like one of them, who's Daniel Sturridge's agent, gives each client an empty book when they sign up, and as a sort of you fill this in, and you want to be proud of this when you finish your career. So they put in, I guess, good and bad media stories and things like that. So they try and, I guess, guide them, but there's agents are, I wrote a book a few years previously on what happens to footballers when they retire. So agents really only have the next 10 years of that player's life really at interest, and then when they retire, they're sort of left to their own devices. So I guess there's a lot of platitudes, I guess, paid by some of the agents, but they're always looking after themselves, and if you're being realistic about things. But they all say that they're looking out for and trying to build a player's career, but they're just looking out for number one, really. Yeah, and obviously these transfers do have a massive impact on the player first and foremost. Some clubs might not want to see these players going, but at the end of the day, it's their lives and if they have to up and leave, it has a real impact on them. And you focus on that. That's the first chapter the first main focus in your book, is the impact of these transfers on players and the difficulties some players have, especially with the deadline. And one of the things that caught my eye was Adnan Januzaj, who was, most people know as a young star that came through Manchester United, and he had just bought a very expensive house in Manchester, and a couple of days later he was off to Real Sociedad.
Yeah, and that was just really an example, because I spoke to players at all levels, and it's that whole, they all basically to a man hate the transfer window and particularly deadline day because, they're mainly men with young families. And, I spoke to one player who was at Sunderland, very happy, settled there, kids at school, wife really happy, with friends and family around. He was sitting at home on deadline day 1 January, just watching the transfer rumours, got a phone call. The next day he's looking at houses in Burnley. So that's the sort of, uncertainty they have and the whole instability. There's another guy I spoke to who'd played for, I think, a dozen clubs, and he wasn't even 30 yet. He hadn't unpacked his boxes from his previous move and he got a call, he was on the move again. So it's that whole instability that they really don't like, particularly I think when they have kids in school and that they tend to think about moves a lot more unselfishly. But at the same time, spoke to Liam Rosenior, who just retired from Brighton last year, and he got a call one transfer deadline day, told in no uncertain terms, look, we're selling you to another club. You have to go down there and take a medical, and this is just a bolt out of the blue, and they do it because they want to play football, but. I guess we read about transfer rumours every day, but I think there's about 15,000 transfers worldwide every year, and only 14% of them are for a transfer fee. So most players are moving because they're unwanted at a club rather than there's 5 or 6 clubs lining up for them. So there's a lot of instability, particularly outside the big 5 leagues in Europe where players aren't getting paid and are on 6-month contracts and being forced out of clubs. There's huge issues there that, outside of that elite FIFPro, or the world governing body, the equivalent of the PFA or the PFAI for worldwide, they represent 60,000 players worldwide, where they have 3 tiers, and the third tier, which a guy's earning less than, I think it's $1,000 a month. That's 45,000 out of the 60,000, which is like Juve or Chelsea's home crowds. And then the top tier, which are the guys I guess we read about, is only 2%, so it's equivalent to Morecambe or Finn Harps. So that's the sort of contrast between, the transfer stories we're reading about, that's the elite 500 or 1,000 players, but the rest are really struggling out there, I guess. And, it's the whole instability of short-term contracts, loan moves and things like that. So it's not all glamour of deadline day, really, in the sky, sort of razzmatazz for most players.
Well, you actually have the figure in your book as well. 120 players were released in the Premier League in 2017 alone. So that's so many players that just out of the blue, their contracts are gone and they don't have a club. And I think a lot of people actually know a few people who are younger who went over to these clubs and just it didn't work out after 3 or 4 years, and they're left looking then. Another thing Liam Rosenior said, which actually struck me, because a lot of the time, especially on transfer deadline day, you'd think if a player is moving, they know who they're moving to. But he said that sometimes you'll have fans come up and ask him if he's going to a certain club and he doesn't know himself. So that's how precarious these things are.
Yeah, and he was one of the players that are amazed at how the foresight of planning by even top clubs, where, you get a call on deadline day just because you're on a list, where he's got a call on deadline day, and because he was a left back or a centre back, he was on a list of 10 players and he was the 7th one they called, and he just amazed that with the money in the game now that, you can see it, I guess, with some of the players. Man United even are linked with this week, where, lads who didn't really do the business at Leicester and Watford and things like that. So this sort of last minute panic buying, and I know there hasn't been much work done in the transfer market yet, but it's another stat in my book where I think it was August 2017 transfer window. There was 130 deals done on the last day of August, and there was only 11 done on the first day of August. So it just total last minute. 30% of those were in the last 2 hours of the window. So still is panic buying. So I'd expect to see quite a bit of business done again on deadline day this year.
And before we finish up, I want to chat about, we've already spoken about the power of the media and how these stories get out there and how rumours start. And I want to talk about the story of Misal Bugdov, because in the book it says that Off the Ball even spoke about him in a list of players to watch in a Times article that was published, top 50 players, young players to watch, and he came in ahead of Lewandowski and ahead of Ozil. and he wasn't real.
Yeah, and I was sort of tempted to try and plant a story about a fake player, but I think it was easier them days. This was sort of, I think it was maybe even pre-Twitter. It was Masol Bugdove, which is I guess the Irish equivalent is my big black donkey or something like that. And it was just planted on different forums and different faked Associated Press match reports, and got out a bit. Every year's Moldovan number 10 wonder kid, a bit like Wayne Rooney, and the Times picked him up. I think he was number 30 in their wonder kids or players to watch. Until a few days later, they realised he didn't exist, and he was replaced by Jay Simpson of Arsenal, who I'm not sure even existed either. But yeah, it was a great story planted by a Galway man, and there was a few others in there too, where, you know, and there's another guy in England who's planted a few who said, you know, there's just this need to be first with news that a lot of news agencies and papers and online media sources don't have time to check the veracity or otherwise of some of these rumours and just go with it, where Sky Sports have often ran with stories that originated with fake Sky Sports logo and imagery and stuff like this. So there's a lot of that out there, and there's a lot of funny stories, I guess, I cover like that. But yeah, I didn't plant one myself. I wouldn't have minded doing so, but I think there's enough rubbish out there anyway without making up players.
One thing I actually wanted to ask you before I let you go, you mentioned Sky Sports there, and a lot of the people I would know wouldn't trust that a transfer is being done until it's confirmed by Sky Sports. Do you think, or do you have a stat there where how many transfers they actually got right, or is there some underlying there? Is that just marketing that people trust them more when it comes to transfers?
I've no stats on it, but I did speak to Jim White for the book, and he wrote the foreword, and he insisted to me that, you know, he personally, if he gets a rumour, he'll check and he'll go to the horse's mouth, where, you know, this guy seems to have a wealth of contacts on his phone. So in years gone by, he mentioned there was a rumour come in Robbie Keane was going to Celtic, so, you know, he rang Harry Redknapp directly to see if there's any truth in it. So I don't know if you can take it as gospel, and I've seen that myself, where, you know, if it's not in Sky, I'm not believing it. But just from Jim White, who's the man synonymous, I guess, with deadline day, he insists that, you know, he'll check anything before going live with it. That's him personally. I don't know for the whole organisation what their policy is, but.
And just to finish off, you finished off a chapter. It was the chapter when you were chatting about how trustworthy media stories are, and it's always around the 21-22% of transfers actually come true. And at that point of writing the book, Lucas Torreira was being linked with Arsenal from Sampdoria. Tottenham were in for Rafinha. Wolves were in for Raul Jimenez, and Everton were bidding for James Maddison. I think there was a couple in there as well, but they're the four that kind of stuck out to me. So three out of the four of them were actually true, except Everton were outbid by Leicester in the final day of the transfer. So
Rafinha as well. Did he go? He didn't go to Spurs.
He didn't go to Spurs in the end.
So about half of those, yeah.
Yeah, roughly around. I think there was another couple in there that I didn't actually get to. So in BBC's transfer gossip today, for anybody who's watching this, in 2 years' time, if Ben Yedder signs for Barcelona for 67 million, if Manchester United finally complete the transfer of Bruno Fernandes, and if Arsenal or Everton sign James Rodriguez from Real Madrid, then we'll be around that same mark again. Alan Gernon, author of Transfer Market, The Inside Stories, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks, Enda.